October 22nd, 2007, and in Natchez, Mississippi, Pearl Street's alive with excitement. A city landmark, over 150 years old, has been saved from the wrecking ball.
Natchez has one of its historic landmarks that's been put to a good use. A really important building that had lain fallow, unused for decades.
I mean, this building has a storied history, and we were fortunate to find this building, and in the unused state it was, because it is so easily adaptable to the purpose that we want.
This rejuvenated 19th century masterpiece will do much for 21st century Natchez.
It's going to bring in a lot of new business directly and indirectly, and we're excited about that. And plus, it's just a beautiful building, and just seeing this beautiful place being restored as it deserves really makes us proud.
But there's another reason for celebration. The day also marks a homecoming for the federal judiciary, which returns to Natchez after nearly 200 years. Its new home, long known as Memorial Hall, has been renamed the United States Courthouse in Natchez, and a new era begins. For hundreds of miles, the highest point along the southern Mississippi River is a town called Natchez. A town once the richest in the South, once the center of an agricultural empire, whose citizens today still uphold traditions connected to the region. One of those traditions, the Natchez Pilgrimage. Since the 1930s, a famous twice-yearly house tour proving that Natchez doesn't live in the past. The past lives in Natchez. But the town's history goes farther back than the houses and personal treasures viewed on the tour. The Natchez Indians knew this part of the Mississippi River and the land around it, hunting and farming here long before the Europeans arrived. Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto was the first to come in 1542, but only briefly. It was the French who in 1716 built Fort Rosalie on the bluff.
One reason the French chose it was because it had very rich fertile soil. It was well protected from flooding because at its highest point, it's almost 200 feet above the Mississippi River. And the French simply acquired some of the land already cleared by the Indians. The Natchez Indians were hospitable to them.
Yet tensions grew between the French and the Natchez, leading the Indians to attack the fort in 1729. Hundreds of settlers were killed and the soldiers driven away. The French retaliated immediately, and so fiercely that within 3 years, the Natchez Indians and their culture were wiped out. Then, in 1781, the Spanish took control of the town, now named Natchez.
The Spanish had the greatest impact on the physical history of the town, however, because they laid out the town plan. And it was during the Spanish period the stage was set for the enormous growth of the Natchez economy.
That growth was triggered in the 1790s by a new strain of cotton, compatible with a wet climate. This crop would transform Natchez into one of the richest towns on the North American continent. In March 1798, Natchez joined the young Republic of the United States as part of a border agreement with Spain. It became the first capital of the Mississippi Territory, the first seat of Adams County, and was first in another way.
It was in Natchez that the first federal court came when the Mississippi Territory came out of colonial Georgia in 1798. The first federal court actually sat in Adams County.
The town's booming cotton-based economy helped propel Mississippi into statehood in late 1817. Later in 1822, the state capital was moved from Natchez, along with the federal courts. But prosperity still reigned. Between 1830 and 1860, Natchez was not only the richest town per capita in the South, it was the richest per capita in the entire United States. In the early 1850s, the city's public school system, called the Natchez Institute, wanted an auditorium built on donated land next to the school on Pearl Street. Architect Thomas Lewinsky's design was selected, a Greek Revival building of grace and stateliness. Construction would take a year, with a new building called Institute Hall, ready in 1853 for a July 4th dedication. Along with school assemblies, the building hosted Mardi Gras celebrations, concerts, and plays, becoming a fixture in the community. For a time in the late 1800s, Institute Hall was known by another name, Opera Hall. But by 1901, Institute Hall was in decline. For the next half-century, the building would serve many functions. In 1921, it was renamed Memorial Hall in honor of those who fought in World War I. Yet it was showing signs of age.
The American Legion decided to take on its quote-unquote restoration. It was really more of a rehabilitation or remodeling. And they took the old hall upstairs and put a stage with a proscenium arch.
In the early 30s, Memorial Hall was the site for the Natchez Pilgrimage Pageants, a highlight of the town's house tours.
And they would turn that hall into just a beautiful garden, as you probably have seen from various pictures. And so it's really been a homegrown event. Many a romance started, and many a marriage came out of those dances.
But by the 60s, Memorial Hall was long past its prime as a performance space. It served as a VFW hall, then the town's public library, and then later a buggy museum. During the 1980s, now shuttered and decaying, the Memorial Hall was all but forgotten. Yet Mimi and Ron Miller of the historic Natchez Foundation saw something worth preserving.
We acquired it in 1987 when the interior ceiling structure had collapsed. The building was uninhabitable. It could not have been used without a major amount of expense. And we got the building, structurally stabilized it, put a new roof on it, and we started to wait out to figure out what in the world we were going to do with the building.
In 1997, the federal courthouse in Vicksburg no longer met the needs of the U.S. government. Knowing this, Mayor Larry Brown and Judge David Bramlett lobbied to move the courts and the Marshal's service to Natchez.
So we were looking for an alternative in order to keep the Western Division open. We were looking for a site. Natchez was a good fit.
The foundation would transfer Memorial Hall either to the General Services Administration or to the city for only the amount of out-of-pocket money we had spent on it.
Still, given its condition, few could see Memorial Hall as a federal courthouse.
Judge Bramlett got people to come over from GSA to look at the building, to talk about his vision for what could happen to the building. And to be honest, we thought he was crazy. We went through a building that was in the ultimate amount of disrepair. The plaster was all hanging down. The floors were basically concrete powder. But after listening to him and his intensity and love of the building and listening to the history in Natchez, we decided to look at it.
Saving the building would require a unique combination of federal, state, and city agencies to fund the project.
You had a variety of players that not only partnered with each other, but trusted each other through the process, and came up with money and ideas in order to make the project work. They included Adams County, the City of Natchez, the Natchez Historical Trust, the Mississippi Department of Archives, the Marshal Service, the courts, and finally GSA.
Memorial Hall, built 1853, The first roller skating rink in Natchez was on the second floor in the year 1883. It was American Legion Hall, Public Library, Natchez Museum, Teen Center, VFW Hall. The front porch of the building was dedicated in 1924 in memory of all the men from Natchez who served in World War I, and their names on 4 bronze plaques on the front. Now, the city has, excuse me, sir, the city has made a deal with the federal government that's fixed to be fully restored. There's going to be a federal courthouse.
Oh, how nice. That's very nice.
It was planned as a 2-phase renovation. Phase 1, to be completed by the city of Natchez, entailed repairing the building's shell, installing a new roof, and renovating the building's interior. Phase 2 involved a major renovation of the interior spaces. Among these, the second-floor auditorium, which would become the federal courtroom, the front staircase, and other areas that were dilapidated or in decay.
It was a wreck, to put it gently, when I first saw it. At the time, the building, I believe, had been sitting vacant for about 30 years, so there was a need to do something with it, or it was basically going to fall in on itself.
The project architect's task was to see a modern federal courthouse beneath the debris, trying to preserve the original structure while integrating the old and new.
You know, you're making small additions to a generally much larger structure. You're making small moves in this time to a much larger historic context. So I think it's a matter of respect for our time and their time.
The approach we took on this one is to kind of a sort of a front of the house, back of the house approach, where if there was an area that didn't need to have all the security or technology involved in it, like the stair hall, we pretty much did almost a straight restoration of that. But when you get into the back of the house with the cells for prisoners and the marshal's equipment, well, that piece almost looks like you wouldn't even know where you are in Memorial Hall. The difference is the places the public see, we try and really celebrate that character.
Phase 1 started in 2003. A year later, in July 2004, a transformation was visible. The exterior brickwork was repointed and windows were restored. Inside, the demolition and cleanup work was finished. The city turned the building over to GSA for Phase 2, renovating to meet the needs of the U.S. courts and the Marshal's Service.
When we started Phase 2 construction, we were pretty much dealing with just a shell. All the flooring had been removed, so we had basically sand for the floor, and that was pretty much it. No heating, no cooling, no power. It was just an empty shell.
The empty shell made clear where new construction should occur and where the original design should be preserved. Renovating the second-floor auditorium into a modern courtroom would pose a challenge. A corridor was needed to connect the front of the building to offices in the back for judges' chambers and jury deliberation rooms. It meant introducing a new wall into the original open space.
To put a courtroom that could not be the full width of the building in and still show the historic width, the fundamental size, scale of the building, that was a challenge.
You have to let people be able to get to the front and the back of the building. And so, for fire codes and for the convenience of the tenants. And I think we came up with a really great solution in which we put in sort of a glass louvered wall that you can see through, you get a sense of what the original room was. It lets light in, but at the same time, you still have that passageway that people can get from the front to the back.
By early 2007, the renovation of Memorial Hall had entered its 4th year. From the street, it was clear something special was occurring. Inside, work continued in the judges' chambers. Meanwhile, during regular project meetings, contractors and partners reviewed the restoration progress, targeting an October 2007 completion date. On the eve of its dedication, the public school building, once known as Memorial Hall, had been transformed into a glorious Greek revival courthouse. Restored in keeping with its past, the building's also modernized for present and future use, including state-of-the-art courtroom technology. Judge Bramlett's vision has been beautifully realized.
I prefer a courthouse which has a traditional look, which is commensurate with the very serious business that goes on inside the courtroom. This is going to be a very imposing structure, a beautiful building that will be conducive to all of the needs of the federal court.
On October 22, 2007, the federal judiciary returned home to Natchez. The dedication of the federal courthouse began by acknowledging a ceremony 150 years earlier.
On May 29, 1852, during a ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone of Institute Hall, President of the Natchez Board of Education, Judge Dubiasen, proclaimed that the building would serve as a monument of the past, showing what can be accomplished in a few years by willing hearts and ready hands. It will be a beacon in the future, calling for deeds to emulate the past.
The future of Natchez, to an extent, and what distinguishes it from other places, is the role its historic character plays in Natchez today and will play in the future. And the General Services Administration is becoming a major player in that by rehabilitating this historic building. And we're taking the best from its past, from the past of this building and from the past of Natchez, but we're giving it a new use, and it will be a viable building today and should have a good future for years to come.
What's so neat about this project is we're putting this building to one more use, a federal courthouse. And then I would imagine, given what we've done to the building, it will be a federal courthouse for quite some time. But it's just part of this long history of uses that the building has had.
This project shows everything that's right about the federal government and what it can do.
Today in Natchez, Mississippi, an historic landmark has been reborn. A partnership has made what seemed impossible possible. And here on Pearl Street, the federal courthouse at Natchez stands as a monument, not only to the past, but as a beacon to the future.